Hi everyone, it's Monica, and welcome back to Tailor-Made Cards for You. Well, I've had an idea stirring around in my little pea brain for a while, and I really wanted to take some time to share with you my idea and see if we can take it a bit farther. Now, these days everybody's taking selfies, and everybody is getting in on the whole selfie thing, even with photobombing. So I thought it would be fun to kind of combine these two stamp sets to create some selfies and maybe even a photo that had a photobomb with one of the monsters. Now, I wasn't really sure exactly how I was going to do this, so I've been practicing on a few cards. So this card here I created with kind of a group photo, and I have some of the monsters kind of peeking in on the sides. And then this other one here, I tried to do like a group selfie. Now, this last one, even though I liked the idea, I wasn't really crazy about all the green that I had. But my zombies have to be green. I guess they could be yellow as well. I think this one worked fine. But it was difficult to create one with monsters that had the same colors. So I really had to think about that. Now, even though I don't hate these cards, these really weren't the cards that I wanted to share with you. So instead, I decided to create a card using Dracula and one of the zombies that is photobombing Dracula when he's taking a selfie. So let me go ahead and show you what I did here. So the first thing that I did is I cut two pieces of paper. One was white and one had some decorative cardstock. And I cut it down to, let's see here, I measured it down to 3 3/4 wide, and then long you're going to go about 5 inches. And then you're going to want to take some sort of a square die cut. And if you don't have a square die cut, I'm sure you could probably just cut it down with an X-Acto knife. But you want it to look like a Polaroid. So you're going to end up with what I'm showing you here. And then once you get your framing down, then you want to pick out a couple of monsters. Now, originally I was working with the Frankenstein, but I really wanted my main image to fill up the Polaroid a little bit more, and that's when I decided to use Dracula. Also, Dracula has some good contrasting colors, so even though I'm going to do a green monster, my Dracula won't be green, so that way it will have some good contrast. So before you start stamping, you want to kind of place your stamps and figure out exactly your alignment. My Dracula, as you can see, I had to move a little bit to the left because my monster is going to be coming in to photobomb him behind. So once I figured out exactly my alignment, then I'm going to get out my stamping tool and do some stamping. Now, the ink that I'm going to be using for my stamping is archival ink, and that's because I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring. And of course, we all know that archival ink is Copic friendly. It won't smear on you. But if you don't have archival ink, one of the ways that you can solve for this is to use clear embossing powder. If you add embossing powder after you stamp, then you'll be able to color to your heart's content and you won't have to worry about any smearing. A lot of times when I know that I'm going to be doing some coloring, I'll add my clear embossing powder anyway because, number one, I like the way that it looks, but also, like I said, it's a good sealant for your ink, and then that way you won't have to worry about it smearing. So I went ahead and stamped my image a couple of times. I wanted to make sure that he was nice and crisp. And then, like I said, I took some clear embossing powder and I added the powder over my image, and then I used my heating tool to set my powder. Now, the masking that I'm going to be using is a set from Brutus Monroe, but there's lots of companies that have this masking tape, and essentially it's just a sticker that you're able to put down on some paper and then pull back up without it ruining your image. So I had been playing, like I said, with this design for a couple of days. So I already had my masking all cut out. So when I went to go ahead and do my masking, I just kept the one that I had been using over the last couple of days. Now, if you're creating a couple of these cards, like I said, you don't have to cut out a mask every single time. You can use the same one over and over again. And while it might get a little bit grungy because you're going to be stamping over the mask, don't forget that, it still is easy to work with. It might not be as sticky after several uses, but I'm sure you can still get several cards out of the same masking. And the masking isn't very expensive. You're going to get several sheets in a pack. So even if you have to cut a few masks for your images to create your cards, it really is not going to be too expensive to have to create several maskings for your images. So like I said, the masking paper that I'm using is from Brutus Monroe, but there's several companies out there that you can grab it from. And then I just went ahead and I pulled the masking that I had already stamped and fussy cut, and I put it right over my image. Now, this is one option. Of course, you could stamp your image and then fussy cut it and then tape it to your background, but I really wanted a flat image. I know sometimes when I'm stamping over images, it looks a lot crisper and it looks a lot nicer if your image is flat. If I had actually stamped it and fussy cut it, then I would have a real small edge to it, and then when I stamped my monster over him, then it may not have looked as organic. And I like my images to look organic. I don't like them to look too placed. And when you're doing this technique, it really does look like it's just an organic picture and not something that you've taped on. So before I got to my monster, I did want to create a little bit of a background. And this is a stamp. It's a smaller stamp that I use for background. It's from Primo Marketing, I believe. And I've had it for a while. And it was a really inexpensive stamp. I think I got it for 99 cents. And I use it when I'm creating some of my mixed media. But I really liked the way that it was kind of had, just some random stripes and backgrounds. And I like that it did look a little bit messy. So I wanted to go ahead and use this for the background of my monsters. Now, as you can see, I'm not using my stamping platform for this. I'm just adding up some ink to my image. And then I'm just pushing down parts of the stamp because I really just want to create a random background. I didn't want to have a square. I just wanted to have some messiness in the background is really what I was going for. I didn't want it to just be white. I wanted it to be a little bit rough. And this is a really easy technique to add some interest to your background. All right, so once I had my background stamped, then I wanted to go ahead and place my monster. Now remember, you have a mask over this, so whichever part of your monster, or your zombie, I should say, goes over your Dracula is not going to be seen. So just keep that in mind when you're placing it. And then once I had the placement of my zombie, I went ahead and I inked him up and I stamped him using my stamp platform. Now you may want to add some paper behind your white cardstock because as you can see, some of the monster is coming off the edge and it will ink up the back of your platform. But this stamp platform is really easy to clean up. You can clean it up with some water or even with some stamping cleaning solution. So I really didn't have a problem with it getting a little bit inky. And then once I was happy with the stamped image, then I went ahead and I got out my clear embossing powder again, and I'm going to add him to the zombie, and then I'll use my heating tool to set the ink. So once my ink was set, then it was time to color up my images. Now, one thing you may want to check before you actually color up your images is make sure that the framing is exactly the way that you want it. There's nothing worse than coloring up a card and then getting ready to put it together and then realizing you didn't stamp it the way that you actually wanted it. This technique is great because you can create several cards doing this. You can just do it in an assembly line, stamp out all of your Draculas first so that way your stamping platform is ready to go. And then once you get all your Draculas stamped out, then you can go ahead and change your stamp and then stamp your monster. So while this is a little bit more of a detailed card, it certainly wouldn't be difficult to create several in one sitting. So once I had added my embossing powder and I heat set it, then I went ahead and I did a quick check with my frame, and as you can see, it turned out great. It really looks like the zombie is photobombing Dracula, and he has no idea that the zombie is coming in behind him. So I went ahead and I got out my greens because I want to color up my zombie green, and I'm going to go ahead and do some quick coloring. Now, I'm not the best colorist, but I really wanted to just do a quick coloring so you can see the effect here. I'm really going for the design in this video, not necessarily my coloring techniques. So I just went ahead and I just colored up my zombie pretty quickly so we can get through the design. Because there is another design I want to show you that's kind of the same idea, but just a little twist to it. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up my video here while I get through the coloring, and then we'll get back here to put the card together. Okay, so with the coloring done, it was time to put the frame over my monsters. I have to say, I really love that music that I was playing. It is so funny. It reminds me of just a little character racing around in a car, and I love to play it when I'm coloring up my images. So as you can see, I went ahead and I just added some tape to my frame, and then I added it right over my white cardstock. And then if you do have a little bit overlay, just take your scissors and trim it. Now, one thing I wanted to share with you that I haven't done in a while is I like to sometimes stamp date my cards. And because I am working with kind of like a Polaroid theme, I thought that this would be appropriate. So this is just a date stamp that I picked up. I don't even know where I picked it up, but I've had it for a while, and I actually recently cleaned out my craft room and refound it. So I've put it where I can use it because I think it's fun to date stamp some of your cards. And that way it creates a keepsake, which a lot of our cards tend to be keepsakes. But this really just gives us an idea of a Polaroid that would have a date stamp on it. Okay, so before we actually put the card together, I wanted to go ahead and give you another idea, which is kind of similar to this design. The first design that we just created was, of course, a zombie photobombing Dracula. But for this particular one, I wanted to go ahead and cut out a smaller Polaroid type of a frame and create some selfies. Now, you know, sometimes when we take selfies, we don't always get our face in the picture. So that was kind of the idea I was going for. I wanted to create a frame where it only had part of the monster inside of the frame. And then we'll put a card together using both these little images. Okay, so using my archival ink, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my images. And keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to worry about the placement when you're stamping because you're going to be cutting this out and placing it using your frame once you've stamped and colored it. I would recommend not cutting down your image before you color it because it's going to be a little bit more difficult to color with a smaller image. And if you have it on a bigger piece of white cardstock, then of course it's going to be easier to color up, and that's the way I'm choosing to go here. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp both of my images on some white cardstock, and I'm going to color them up. Now, I didn't use embossing powder on these images because I wanted to show you don't necessarily have to use the embossing powder when you're using archival ink. It's only when you're using ink that you aren't sure if it's going to be Copic friendly, because the alcohol-based Copics will smudge some of the inks that aren't Copic friendly. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind. And then you're going to do the same thing with your Frankenstein stamp. Just go ahead and stamp him onto your white cardstock. Just make sure that you do leave enough room so that way when you do go to trim your cardstock, you have enough room to add your frame. Now for these two images, I didn't take the time to film me coloring them up, because you saw that I colored them up earlier. You just want to go ahead and color your images before you actually trim your cardstock. That will just be a lot easier when you're going to frame them. And then once you get them all colored up, then we're going to go ahead and frame them with the pre-cut frames we created earlier. Now for the framing, I just pretty much eyeballed it. I had my images colored up, and then I just went ahead and I took my frames and I figured out exactly how I wanted my image to show in my frame. Now remember, we're going to be recreating like a selfie where we didn't actually get the full face in the image. So you don't want to position your frame where your image is right in the middle. You want to kind of have it off center. So think about when you're taking a selfie, how some of the face gets cut off. You know, maybe you'll cut off your mouth, maybe you'll cut off part of your head, and that's the way that you're going to want to position it. And then once you get that figured out, then you're just going to take some adhesive and adhere your frame right over your monster, and you're going to do this with both images. And then once you get your frames adhered to your cardstock, then it's just as simple as taking a pair of scissors or maybe your paper trimmer to trim it down. But really the positioning is the most important part. You just want to make sure that you're getting the true essence of someone taking a selfie and cutting off part of their face. Now I'm not going to necessarily complete the cards on camera because you guys kind of know how to put a card together. I just really wanted to use this video to give you another idea for a Halloween card, and this one kind of has just a fun twist to it. Even though it has the monsters, it's not really a scary card, it's more of a funny card. And of course, you know, with the selfie you can kind of put any kind of sentiment that you want. I will share with you my finished cards at the end to give you an idea how I positioned my Polaroid shots, and also my picture of the card where I did kind of like a group selfie, just to show you the couple of ideas that I had for these monster stamps. So again, don't forget, you don't necessarily have to stick to one stamp set when you're putting your cards together. Try to find stamps that work together. And in this particular video, I'm showing you that I have two different types of stamps, but they're still monsters. You've got your zombie stamps, and then you have your traditional, you know, monster stamps, which are your Frankenstein and your witch and whatnot. And I'm going to be back in a couple of days because I have another idea using the witch. I didn't necessarily use the witch on this one because for the selfie I wanted the face to be going forward, and of course the witch stamp has like a profile, so it really wouldn't work for my selfie on that one. But I do have another idea that I think might be kind of a fun card as well. So I'll be back in a few days with that one. So as always, I'll leave a list of all the products that I've used to create the cards along with the links to the stores. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So leave me a comment and let me know what you think of my idea for the monster selfie cards. I'd sure love to hear your feedback. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.